CNN has released new approval ratings for President Biden, and it's not looking good. Just 32% of respondents said the president should be reelected, down from 37% in December. Another 67% said they believe Biden does not deserve to be reelected. 42% approve of the president's overall job performance, and support for the president's handling of the economy, immigration, and guns failed to hit 40%. Whew, is this surprising to you?
No, I mean, although I will say that there are a lot of voters out there who are just disapproving of both sides. So these numbers, while they encourage me as someone on the right, there's always the question of whether they think the other side is worse, and that's always not clear from these polls. But I would say that these poll numbers may further some of the chatter about whether or not Biden is actually the best candidate for the Democratic Party to run in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, so polls from last month that did a Biden to Trump matchup had Trump ahead by a little bit, by a few points. Not extreme, but ahead. Moreover, folks have been making a lot of the fact that even before the indictment, Trump was pulling ahead of DeSantis quite considerably, and that trend seems to have continued post-indictment. So there was this question of whether or not you're going to see Trump gain in voters' share over both Joe Biden and DeSantis, whether the increase over DeSantis is going to be reflected in an increase over Biden, whether he's generally becoming more electable, or whether or not it's just a relative metric within his own party. And I do think a lot of Democratic voters are principally drawn by the question of whether or not a given candidate can beat the other side, specifically beat Donald Trump because of the particular space that Trump occupies in the liberal imagination and in reality. So, I'm not especially surprised by this, but I do wonder how much his popularity is being driven by the fact that he's in the middle of something right now and is very much being perceived, as a victim because of the nature of the indictment.
Yeah, I mean, like I said in a different conversation today, I think Trump is at his best when he can credibly make the case that the system is screwing him in order to get to his voters. I think that's his political sweet spot. That's where he gets a lot of enthusiasm on the right, but also gets a lot of those crossover voters, the type of voters who voted twice for Obama and then Trump in 16 and then Biden in 2020, right? So I do think that is his political sweet spot, and to the extent that the establishment plays into his political sweet spot, right now we've got this kind of interesting loop where everybody benefits except for the country with regard to the indictment, right? So Donald Trump, I think short term definitely benefits from this. And you can see with all the performance and CNN on the boat in the East River watching the plane land on the runway in New York, right? We're going to get Donald Trump. And that benefits Trump short term, that benefits media ratings short term, but obviously it's a huge precedent to break for the country. I think we will go back and look at this moment as, as something that can't be undone, right? Where there's going to be some enterprising DAs out there in red states, and they're going to start indicting former presidents on the Democratic side, and that this really is precedent-breaking material. But in the short term, it kind of helps everybody, and I think it's playing into this sense of Donald Trump to come back to the poll numbers as the guy who the system just won't allow the American people to like.
Yeah. Democrats do not do well when the entirety of the conversation is about Trump. I hate to break it to folks, but we already saw this play out in 2016. If I were to ask you, what was Hillary Clinton all about? What was the central promise of her 2016 campaign? Why was Hillary Clinton running for office? I think a lot of people would be hard-pressed to come up with it. Right, it was about her, right? It was very personal. It was about glass ceiling breaking. It was about it's her turn. I mean, and people who I'm sure worked for her campaign, would say, well, no, we had this policy agenda, and she had a plan to, preserve Social Security for another 3 years, and whatever. I'm sure she had stuff. But that doesn't comes front of mind for folks. It doesn't become a central part of the conversation when most of what's coming out of Democratic Party people's mouths is Trump is bad. Now, Biden, in contrast, in 2020, there was some Trump is badding, but there was also, we've got to preserve American democracy, we've got to get past the COVID crisis, there's an economic crisis, and I have to resolve it. And he managed to avoid some of the, I'm going to call it Trump identity extremism. I'm going to call it a Trump version of identity politics, where Democrats can only perceive their enemies in the frame of Trumpism without having their own affirmative agenda for the country. And because of the crisis that was 2020, I think that Biden was able to avoid all of that. Plus, Trump was the president of the United States of America and wasn't an outsider, didn't occupy that same platform of being able to say, I'm the one that's going to drain the swamp, I'm the one from the outside. He was the king of the swamp at the time. This time, the roles are reversed. And I'm really concerned that Democrats aren't remembering that just because they won in 2020 doesn't mean that the lessons of 2016 don't hold.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right when you point to, for example, that Hillary Clinton's platform almost seemed filled in after the fact, right? The thrust of her campaign was, I deserve to be president, and it was all about her. And then the policy positions were just filled in by some like executive committee of policy staff, right? There wasn't a central policy message. There wasn't a direct message about what she was going to do for the American people at the top of that agenda. And I think you're also right to point out, whoever holds the keys to the kingdom gets sort of the responsibility for where we are right now. And because the trajectory of the country is so negative right now, I think whoever is ultimately responsible for that gets a ding on the debate. However, I will say all of that was true in 2022.
Right. I mean, but that's the thing. The roles were reversed in 2022. You mean the midterm election?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. I think largely Democrats, I don't want to say they shouldn't take credit for 2022, but abortion won in 2022. My perspective is that a lot of voters liked the idea of kind of these Republican cultural attacks on the institution of Roe v. Wade, but polls demonstrate that the majorities of Americans strongly supported the status quo. And it was a kind of dog chases car, dog catches car scenario where you liked the game when it was a chase. And now that you've got this mouthful of rubber, you don't know what to do about it. Trump, ironically, demonstrated a great deal more insight on that issue than the rest of the Republican Party, making some comments around midterms that he didn't really think that ending Roe, or I guess this was last summer, ending Roe was a good political strategy, or that it wouldn't inure to the political benefit of Republicans. And I also think that Democrats engaged in this kind of Pied Piper strategy in some of these elections and midterms where they participated in these Republican primaries, boosting the more Trumpian extreme candidate that went on later to use in the general election. So they might be looking at 2022 and saying, well, that strategy worked. Let's do it on the massive scale with Donald Trump. Let's Pied Piper him into the spot, and Joe Biden will easily beat him. But these polls are, one, not showing that Joe Biden will easily beat him, and two, that Pied Piper strategy was deployed in 2016, and we all know what happened there.
Yeah, it's sort of a case of be careful what you wish for. I have a slightly different take, though, on 2022. And it's related to this conversation, because I almost think that because Trump wasn't on the ballot, and because there was no ability to sort of meet the Trump derangement syndrome on the left with the Trump enthusiasm syndrome on the right. But in absence of Trump, I think it's the same problem with Hillary Clinton. Republicans didn't run on anything in particular, right? Democrats did run on abortion, but Republicans, Mitch McConnell actually came out and said, no, we have no agenda for the Senate races. Nobody has an agenda. We are just anti-Democrat. And I really do think that it's in this environment, whether it's coming from the Democrats or from the Republicans, the other guy is bad without actually putting forward an agenda and a vision for what you want, how you want to make this country better, how you're going to solve the issues that increasingly seem to be piling up. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like the last few years, has been just one sort of crisis and tragedy after the other. And people, I know I am losing hope in sort of a bright American future. And to the extent that any candidate connects with that sense, I think actually a lot of people are flexible, as we've seen with these voters, between whether the Democrats are going to connect with that sense of decline more, or whether the Republicans are. But people aren't very thrilled with either. So I think there's a lot of hedging bets. And to the extent that anyone is running on only I don't like Trump, or only I don't like Democrats, they're crazy, I think that's going just not to work.
Yeah, it's also voter turnout depressing, I think, to not have an affirmative agenda. I think we saw a high turnout because the primacy of abortion in midterms. We saw a high turnout in 2020 from Democrats because of the implications of, we got to win the Senate back. Donald Trump could do X, Y, Z. We're all so upset about kids in cages, which we never talk about anymore, but fine. We were also upset at the time about kids in cages. And that drove turnout. Democrats don't do well in low turnout elections. And I think an apathy-driven election that's completely a referendum on how good, bad, or illegal Donald Trump is, if it depresses turnout overall, I suspect that's going to inure to the benefit of Republicans more than Democrats. So that's how I see things playing out. We'll continue to follow all of this, of course, including these poll numbers, and have more rising for you after this.